Coming up on Sunday's edition of Politics Scotland, coronavirus is ripping through Scottish university halls of residence and shows little sign of slowing down.
We can't social distance in the flat either. It's impossible. We've got a small kitchen and there's 11 of us cooking at the one time. So the people that don't have coronavirus are going to get it.
I'll be speaking to the Deputy First Minister and asking him why the government didn't see this coming and what they plan to do about it now. And I'll be asking the UK government what plans it has for all the businesses not covered by Rishi Sunak's latest job scheme. Hello and welcome to the programme. According to Scotland's National Clinical Director, coronavirus is now accelerating across the country. Hundreds of students are quarantined in halls of residence, not knowing if they'll be able to go home for Christmas. Well, I'll be speaking to the Deputy First Minister shortly, but first let's have a quick run through some of this morning's headlines with our political reporter, David Wallace-Lockhart. Good morning, David. Now, you want to start off, you've picked out a story about students, haven't you?
Yeah, so there's quite a few papers talking about the student situation currently. You may remember earlier in the week there was some confusion about whether students who haven't tested positive for coronavirus, who aren't self-isolating, whether or not they were able to go home. The Scottish Government clarified that they weren't allowed to go home, also said they shouldn't be socialising outside their household at the moment or visiting bars or restaurants. Now, the Sunday Mail is reporting that hundreds of students have chosen to ignore that guidance, have decided to go home. Mail on Sunday reporting the same thing. One student is quoted saying, "The rules are so restrictive, why would anyone want to stay?" The Tories, Labour and Greens all criticising how it's been handled. The Scottish Government is saying there will be clear guidance coming about what students can or can't do, what support should be available to them, perhaps information and clarity around that idea of going home or not. Scotland on Sunday also quoting public health expert Professor Linda Bald, who's quite critical of the decision to let students go back to university halls en masse.
And Jason Leitz has been in the Herald saying it's all getting pretty bad.
Yeah, the National Clinical Director is saying that the virus is accelerating throughout Scotland. Now, when we look at the most recent numbers, that might not come as a surprise to many people. There were 714 cases yesterday in Scotland. That's the highest the figures have ever been. And even if we just look back 6 days ago on Monday, that figure was only at 225 cases. Also, what's concerning is the proportion of tests coming back positive. They're currently up at 11.5%, and the World Health Organization says that when that figure goes above 5%, that's when things start to get a bit worrying. Now, the First Minister is taking to Twitter to point out we are testing more people than we had been previously, that there are university clusters, of course, going on at the moment, but concerning figures, and we'll get the latest this afternoon.
David, don't go away because we'll be talking to you later on. Now, the spread of coronavirus is accelerating across Scotland, as we've just been saying, and that rise is due in no small part to the return of university students. Given that at the time they came back, there were already bans on households mixing across Scotland, why was it deemed OK for students, often from up to 12 different households from across the UK, to live together in halls of residence flats? Many students are now quarantined and unable to go out. Not the start to the first year they'd hoped for. Here's what Tessa Morrison, a Glasgow University fresher who tested positive, had to say to this programme.
4 of us have been tested positive, 2 people have been tested negative, and the rest haven't been tested. And we can't social distance in the flat either. It's impossible. We've got a small kitchen and there's 11 of us cooking at the one time. So the people that don't have coronavirus are going to get it. I mean, there's not even air ventilation. The place is boiling. Things break down all the time. I mean, our kitchen stinks and we don't know why. It's not the best. The morale isn't very good. I mean, obviously it's not too bad because we have each other to socialise with. But there is a few people that are really unhappy right now, which is concerning. I think it was a mistake putting people in halls of residence. Maybe they should have tested everyone beforehand, before putting us into halls, or strictly contained it in halls without spreading it to the rest of Glasgow, or even putting us into halls in December, because this is a bit of a nightmare. And yeah, so honestly, my anger, and I think my family, I can't speak for them, but I think my family's anger would be towards the government.
Well, as it happens, I'm joined now by a member of the government, the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney. Good morning, John Swinney. Well, first of all, the latest advice to students who are stuck in these halls, can they go home?
Our advice to students is that they should stay in the halls if they are able to do so, and that's to ensure that we minimise the spread of the virus around the country. And it's important that any student who is self-isolating, or students in general who are in halls in the situation that they are facing, are given the full and proper support of the university or the college that is supporting them. And that's obviously an issue that we've prioritised in our discussions with universities in the course of the last few days.
You say that they shouldn't go home because you don't want to spread the virus. Students who test negative, should they go home?
We would encourage students to stay in their halls of residence if they are able to do so, and they should have the support in place to enable that to be the case, because that's the most effective way of ensuring that we can contain the virus in the circumstances and the conditions that we currently face. Having taken a decision to enable students to come onto campus and to begin their academic year, as many of them were keen to make sure they were able to do so.
Can you guarantee they can go home for Christmas?
That's obviously an absolute priority for us, to make sure that students are able to do so. And all of our thinking and all of our prioritisation is about making sure, firstly, that all students are safe and well supported, and we're working with universities to make sure that is the case, and also that they can experience positively the student experience that they signed up to do by being on campus and being able to take forward their learning, and crucially enabling them to be able to return to families at the Christmas break and to enable them to experience that period of time at home, which all of them would be expecting to do.
Yeah, I mean, you can't guarantee it though, can you? I understand. I mean, obviously, if this spreads even further, it might not be possible to guarantee it.
It's a bit of time away, Gordon, but it's an absolute priority for the Scottish Government to make sure, first and foremost, that students are safe and well supported and able to participate in their education. That's why they have been enabled to come onto campus to enable that to be the case. But we also want to make sure that students are supported in every aspect of well-being, and crucially being able to get back home to families at Christmas time is a really important part of that work, and that's very much at the heart of our thinking and the approach that we take forward.
Glasgow University is already giving, or announced it's going to give, rent refunds to some of their students who've been caught up in this. Are you considering, as a government, a package of measures to help universities and help students get through this?
We're obviously working very closely with the universities. We worked with the universities, with the student bodies and trade unions to formulate the guidance that would enable universities to reopen again and to enable students to be able to take forward their education. So we're working closely with the university sector. The First Minister and I and Richard Lockhead spoke with university principals on Friday. It's been one of many conversations that we have had, and we'll continue that dialogue to make sure.
But would you be prepared to fund universities to give rebates to students?
Well, obviously, we'll consider any issues that come forward to us from the universities. Glasgow University has taken what I think is a bold and a very appropriate move in the course of the last 24 hours. They're putting a lot of support in place to students who are affected by COVID and those who are self-isolating, and that's very welcome. And obviously, other universities around the country are doing exactly the same in terms of supporting affected students and making sure that young people are able to embark on their education in as close to the approach that.
But I think if I were one of the management of Glasgow University, I'd be saying, well, I'm very glad, Mr. Swinney, you think what we've done is bold and appropriate, but we're under pressure from all sorts of directions financially because of this crisis. It would be very helpful if you just gave us the money to fund that.
And government's provided additional funding to universities.
Well, more funding.
Well, we've provided more funding to universities already as part of COVID, and we've also provided the assurance that we'll be funding places for additional students that have gone to university as a consequence of the decisions we made around the exam grades. So universities have had more money from the government, but of course we will continue to discuss these issues, important as they are, with universities on an ongoing basis.
I did an interview with a health expert, actually at Glasgow University, that happened yesterday, and she was saying that really what you need is to test students every 5 days. But the problem seems to be we don't have the capacity to do that. Do we have any idea when there might be the capacity to do that sort of thing?
I think the most important point on testing just now is that there is adequate testing capacity in Scotland to follow the testing strategy that we have opted for as a country and which has been extensively discussed. So that testing capacity exists. We are, of course, supplementing it on an ongoing basis. And over the last couple of days, we've had new walk-in testing centres opened in Aberdeen and in Edinburgh. And over the course of the next 10 days, there'll be a further 2 centres opened in Stirling and another one in Glasgow. So we're constantly expanding the testing capacity.
Would it be possible would it be possible to test even halls of residence students every 5 days anytime soon?
That doesn't accord with the testing strategy that we've adopted, and it's been based on clinical advice, which is based on the foundations that we should be testing symptomatic individuals and undertaking the test and protect arrangements as a consequence. So that would be a departure from the strategy that we've extensively discussed to put in place as a robust way of ensuring that we keep coronavirus under control.
Now, can I ask you about something that's come up this morning, which there are suggestions that your government is in discussion about postponing next year's election. What's happening?
Obviously, there's a great deal of uncertainty about the period that lies ahead, and the government's plan and Parliament's plan is that the election should take place as scheduled on the first Thursday in May. Obviously, there are some contingencies being looked at by Parliament, by all parties, and obviously we'll continue to discuss those issues because it's vital that we have that democratic process to enable the people of Scotland to choose their government. And certainly from the government's point of view, we want the election in May to go ahead as timetabled already.
Yeah, but this is a bit like some of the other issues we've had, isn't it? Wouldn't the counter-argument to that would be, look, this isn't going away, this virus. It seems to be getting worse. Wouldn't it be better just to, I mean, it's not the end of the world if it was postponed to, say, October. Wouldn't it be better to do that now so we've got clarity?
Certainly, the government's priority is to make sure the election can take place as timetabled in May. I think people would expect that. It's the moment in the electoral cycle where Parliament should be re-elected and the public should have their choice about who should represent them in Parliament. So I think it's important that we focus on that as the timetabled priority for the people to decide. And obviously it's appropriate that we look at contingencies in case that is not practical. But the government's priority is to make sure that the elections take place in May as scheduled, and we're working towards that objective.
Now, coming to areas which are more your direct responsibility with your education hat on, or at least your school's hat on, the exam system next year, I think you said there was a very real risk the exams wouldn't go ahead. What's the latest on that?
We're consulting widely about the issues in connection with next year's exam diet. The government's priority, just as I've said to you in relation to the elections, is that we should see the exam diet go ahead in next spring. But we have to be mindful of the likelihood that there will be some interruption to learning and teaching between now and then for some learners at local level within Scotland. And it's important that every learner is given a fair opportunity to achieve their qualifications and to be able to progress as a consequence. So we're looking at contingency options around what might affect the exams in the spring, and I will be making a statement to Parliament a week on Tuesday to set out the latest position on the government's thinking and to give clarity to the education system on what we will do.
Is there a middle way between what happened this year and having a normal exam diet? I mean, is there some way technology could be used so that we could have an exam system, but without students having to gather by the 100 in halls in order to sit the exams?
There are different options available, and you're right, Gordon, that there are middle ways on this question. Obviously, in the spring of this year, we really had absolutely no alternative. We closed the schools with 48 hours notice, and it was impossible for teachers to go back into schools to gather material and to produce an evidence pack, for example, that would support continuous assessment. It just was physically impossible to do that. Now, obviously, we're at a different stage in the education and the school year at this stage. So we have other options that we can look at, and those are the issues that we're discussing with a range of stakeholders within the education community to come to conclusions.
Right, you talked a second ago about interruptions for some students. I mean, obviously, there's a great reluctance to close schools because of coronavirus. But presumably, I don't mean even individual schools, never mind the whole school system. But I presume nothing can be ruled out given the way things are going.
The return to schooling has gone, I think, very well, Gordon. We've been back. We've been back for a number of weeks. The attendance rate is now over 90% in schools. At the end of last week, it was around about 92, 93%. And the level of staff absence is only around about 2%, which obviously we've put extra staffing resources into schools to take account of that fact. So actually we've managed to return full-time schooling in Scotland very effectively and on a very sustainable basis around the country. So far, the level of disruption has been very low. Now, obviously, we're going into winter, a less certain period, and I'm absolutely determined to make sure that we keep our schools open and functioning. Now, one of the judgments the government has been making on a whole host of other questions has been against the test of how can we make sure that we keep the schools open. So some of our steps, which applied more constraints last week, for example, were designed to protect the opening of schools and the sustainability of education around the country. And that is the absolute priority of government ministers at this time.
All right, Luke, we'll have to leave it there. John Swinney, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, Rishi Sunak's much-praised furlough scheme finishes at the end of October, and its replacement hasn't been greeted with quite as much enthusiasm, with estimates suggesting as many as 1 million people could be facing unemployment. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to the Scotland Office Minister, David Duckett. Well, first of all, there are numbers of Tory MPs now, possibly enough if they ganged up with the opposition to give them a majority, demanding that the government in London put any further measures on COVID before Parliament for the approval of MPs. Do you agree with them?
I agree that we should be doing the right thing. The UK government believes we are doing the right thing, and that any extension to any restrictions or any measures that we put in place to protect lives and to protect livelihoods should indeed be appropriate and measured. And there will be lots of opportunity. In fact, this coming week there'll be an opportunity to debate that very matter.
Yes, what your MPs are saying is not that. They're saying they want the chance to vote through any measures before they come into force.
Yes, well, I mean, the existing Coronavirus Act is already in place, and it gives the UK government and associated devolved administrations have their own powers as well to be able to do on the basis
no,
of
we
the
know
best
all
scientific
that,
basis
but what
of
I'm asking you
evidence
is,
available.
What your own MPs are saying, and a lot of them, it's not me, it's your own MPs, is we want the chance to vote first before any other measures come into effect. And I'm just curious as to whether you agree with them.
Well, we're in discussions with those MPs. All MPs have a voice, and the UK government is listening very closely to their concerns.
And will it say yes?
Well, that is for us to resolve those conversations, and those conversations are ongoing. And as I said, there's a debate and a vote in Parliament later this week.
Now, the new job support scheme that Rishi Sunak brought in this week, let me ask you this. If I'm the owner of a business or I work in a company which simply can't operate at the moment because of government decree for very reasonable grounds of coronavirus, let's say I run a business that organises concert venues, or I run a theatre, or maybe a football club, because a lot of football clubs are not immensely rich. What should I do? Because Rishi Sunak's scheme doesn't seem to help me at all.
Well, the job support scheme is aimed at protecting viable jobs, which I think is what you're getting at. But there are other schemes available. There's an extension on the VAT reduction on tourism and hospitality, for example. There's an extension
but
on the deadline for
if I
applying for
run
business
concert
interruption
venues
loans.
or a theatre or a football club, none of this is of any use to me. I'm not getting any revenues.
No, I disagree with that, because there are the VAT extensions. There's the tax return extensions. There's been an extension to the deadline for applying for a business interruption loans. There's been grants available. There's been billions of pounds provided to support the creative arts and cultural industries as well. So it's not so the job support scheme is aimed primarily and very much focused on those jobs that are reduced in hours because of a reduction in demand.
So
a temporary reduction in demand.
What is your message then to the companies the sorts of companies that I've just mentioned? Because there appears to be nothing new to help them, and a lot of them will be thinking, sorry, without any form of furlough, we can't afford to go on. We're going to have to close down.
Well, the furlough scheme has been one of the most generous schemes of its kind in the world. It was originally due to end in June. It was extended already at the request of many businesses around the UK with the flexibilities that they demanded to the end of October. And from the 1st of November, not only will the job support scheme be in place, but also the job retention bonus will be in place, and all the other measures that I've already mentioned.
Yes,
the
which
loans,
doesn't. Okay.
the grants.
One of the first things he did when he became leader of the Scottish Conservatives a few weeks ago, Douglas Ross published a paper on jobs, and his key recommendation number 2 was a government fund directed towards firms facing localised lockdowns, replicating the cash support they receive from furlough. Now, the job support scheme does not do that.
But I think what Douglas was referring to was something that devolved administrations could do for localised purposes. So the devolved administration in Scotland, the Scottish Government, have received £6.5 billion as a result of Barnett consequentials for the Scottish Government to decide what to do with. And it's up to the Scottish Government to decide what to do in local situations, in the same way as it's up to them to decide on what lockdown restrictions there are in many occasions.
Okay. As I say, this demand or recommendation said replicating the cash support they receive from furlough. You're now in fact, you've just said it, you're in the rather absurd position where the Scottish Conservatives are demanding things of the SNP government in Edinburgh, which your own government in London isn't prepared to do.
I don't think that what was demanded was an extension of the furlough scheme.
It says,
I think what Douglas
I'll read it to you again, it says
about,
replicating the cash support they receive from furlough.
And what the job support scheme provides cash support such that an employee who's only working
not
2
for the
days
companies we were talking about a moment ago, like concert venues and football clubs and so on. It doesn't help them at all.
But like I said, the coronavirus business interruption loans, the Kickstart scheme to attract new young people into work. There's a lot of schemes, not just aimed at protecting existing jobs, but also for creating new jobs, which is going to be hugely important moving forward.
But when I ask you a question about this, you're talking about something different. The point is the Scottish Conservatives now want something and are demanding something of the Scottish Government, which the government of which you are a member is not prepared to do, which is to replicate the cash support of the furlough scheme for companies in particular sectors like hospitality or concert venues or whatever.
I'm not sure I see the distinction that you're looking for there, Gordon, because Douglas Ross made his point and asked the question of the Prime Minister on Wednesday at Prime Minister's Question Time. And then on the back of the statement by Rishi Sunak on Thursday, he showed his appreciation and accepted that was essentially what he was asking for.
I'm not suggesting for 1 second that Douglas Ross can't contradict himself. I've spoken to at least 2 Scottish Conservatives over the past 10 days, done interviews with them, and they suggested that the Scottish Conservatives were making representations to Rishi Sunak to get an extension of the furlough scheme or something which replicated it, to use your own words, after the end of October. Were those representations simply ignored?
Well, I don't think so, because, I mean, all MPs, including my colleagues in the Scottish Conservative Party, make representations to government ministers all the time, and some of those get responded to, some of those are acted upon. And what we've seen with the job support scheme is, albeit not all industries, as you've pointed out, but in those industries which are deemed viable and only suffering a temporary setback due to a reduction in demand because of the COVID crisis, are being focused on. And those that aren't, well, the people who are working in other industries will be supported through other schemes, whether it's other schemes available to those businesses or the jobs plan, the creating of jobs, the supporting of training and addressing skills shortages that the UK government is addressing elsewhere.
Another one of Douglas Ross's key recommendations was a joint vehicle for Scottish and UK government investments to build better rail links from the Central Belt to Aberdeen and Inverness, and a 3-lane M8. I hope, actually, for health and safety reasons, he meant a 6-lane M8. Any news on when this co-investment vehicle might be arriving?
Well, co-investment vehicles already exist in the form of city and region growth deals. And under the terms of the UK internal market legislation, that would involve or include a mechanism for a UK government to invest more directly in the kind of infrastructure.
He wants a co-investment vehicle. What the withdrawal bill calls for is the internal markets bill calls for an investment vehicle. It doesn't involve the Scottish government.
Well, there's no reason why it couldn't involve the Scottish government, and it certainly
doesn't. Yes, there is, because it isn't in your bill, and you could have put it in the bill.
Yes, but that doesn't take away the possibility for the UK government and the Scottish government to work together on such projects.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. David Duckett, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, as we said, that was the Scotland Office Minister, David Duckett, speaking to me a little earlier. Back now to our political reporter, David Wallace-Lockhart. David, this revolt by Conservative MPs, I mean, they've just got elected with a whopping majority, but if the opposition gang up with them, it sort of looks like Boris Johnson could be under challenge here.
Well, it does look like there's a revolt here, and a revolt when you have a majority that big has to be quite a big revolt to make you worried. So on Wednesday, Boris Johnson will seek an extension to powers he has that allows him to act unilaterally when it comes to bringing in new measures to deal with COVID. But there will be an amendment, by the looks of it, from Graham Brady, the chairman of that powerful 1922 committee of backbench Tory MPs. And he will be looking to mean that MPs need to get a debate and a vote on new measures when they're coming in. It looks like the opposition parties could back this measure. Graham Brady says he has the numbers to bring that through. Interesting there that David Duckett was saying that the government, let's remember he's a government whip, will be listening very carefully. In political parlance, that can sometimes sound like they may give the rebels what is something that they want.
And what John Swinney was saying, I mean, the message to students is, don't go home.
Yeah, and I mean, the message certainly at the moment was, he was saying they really do want students to remain in those halls, especially in the case that they may have tested positive for coronavirus or are self-isolating because it's present within their household. Of course, what he was saying, it seems a long way off yet, but questions have been raised about Christmas, saying that he hopes to get them home for that.
Yes, but of course that will be conditional on what happens to coronavirus in between then. David Luke, thank you very much indeed for that. That's all we have time for today. I'll be back next week with Wednesday's edition of Politics Scotland. Until then, from all of us in the programme, goodbye.